Commander Riker is missing 3 costal struts on one side and 4 on the other. Marasta Yale's parents took her to the planetarium when she was a child, and a disastrous first contact with the Klingon Empire led to decades of war. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello, hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we're doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 4, Episode 15, First Contact. Story by Mark Zicree, who we know well. Teleplay by 5 people: Dennis Bailey, David Bischoff, Joe Menosky, Ronald D. Moore, and Michael Hiller. Directed by Cliff Bull. This was February 16th, 1991. How you doing today, Sirach?
Doing good. February 16th, 1991. Time flies.
That was a lot of writers, man. 6 people had their hands in that one. So who knows who wrote what or who did what? That's nuts.
Well, we know Mark Zicree did everything and everyone else just did a little.
Yeah. He took everybody out to lunch and told them the story.
Yeah, I saw the credits for this and I thought, wow, that's a lot of names. Of course, we got Ronald Moore and Michael Piller. It's 2 of my favorite names out there, right? So you know that when they put their name on something, it's going to be exceptionally well thought out. And this is what I felt like when I was watching this episode. I felt like, oh, I'm in for a treat. We got a different kind of opening. I always kind of take notes of the opens. And this one, the opening was the whole hospital gurney, moving across, and what we eventually see is Riker on that bed. And so I love the opening. I love starting with the mystery and kind of working backwards from there. And also this gave a lot of backstory to First Contact, which I hear so much about. And this finally gave me a little bit more context to the history behind it.
Yeah. There's a lot in this episode. And not the least of which, this actress, I don't know if you recognized her, but that is BB Newirth of Cheers. She was Lilith on Cheers. She's also like a Broadway star, super talented actress. Small role in this one, but more on that in a moment. So Sirach, full disclosure, I've seen this episode before. And I will say that this, in my young mind back in the day, was one of the most memorable episodes, and it left the biggest impression on me. I would say top 10. I'm not saying necessarily the best episode, maybe one of the better ones for sure, but it just left a strong impression on me because I know that I couldn't be the only one that thought like, whoa, feels like there's almost a lot of truth to this episode, or potential truth or possible truth, where a government will make that thought and will make that decision of, okay, we ran into aliens or whatever it happens to be. Well, not so fast. Should we actually make it public, or are we not ready for this, and why? And it opens up that entire story and that entire can of worms that seems very believable.
Whew, yeah, that's why this episode is deep. We always talk about full disclosure. The public, there is a part of the public that really has a desire to have a full disclosure by the government and governments of the world to say, what are these unidentified flying objects? What's going on in Roswell? What's happening on these military bases, and all of the suspicions and conspiracies that we've heard about. And this episode kind of dives into that from a completely different perspective, from us going to other people, which I felt perfect tool, right? It's like, this is the way you want to kind of have the argument, because it would make sense for us to infiltrate another culture, another group of people, or humanoid-like people, in order to understand whether they were whether our presence or the reality of our existence would upset their existence, right? Would it upset them to the point of essentially annihilation of their culture, of their species, of their kind? Is that too much to know? And part of that is, why the argument for non-disclosure by governments is made, right? Like, the public can't handle it if we were to tell them everything that we know about everything. And there's a part of you that are like, yeah, you know what? Don't tell me. I don't now. Now that I know, I don't really want to know, because you can't go backwards. You can't,
Mm-hmm.
Once you let that out of the bag, there's no going backwards from that. Now, whatever chaos ensues, whatever riots ensues, whatever religions topple or change, you're looking at a kind of a domino effect, for the society or culturally.
Yeah, and also, real quick, this is the last episode in the first half of The Next Generation. As in, the end of this episode is the midway point of the series. It's 176 episodes, and this was episode 88. So starting next week, we are diving into the second half of TNG. And I do feel like this show has hit its stride. So thank God, because
Yeah.
because if it hadn't by now, I don't know how it would have survived. But clearly, we're in good episodes now. It's like almost weekly, solid good episodes. We're right in the meat of it all. So just interesting to note that we're now in the midway point of The Next Generation. And yeah, I agree with everything that you were saying, that what if, like, think about it, like, if our government, for example, there's some aliens that talk to them and they got all these fingers or whatever, and then we have some horny human that wants to have sex with an alien, green alien or whatever. And we're like, okay, we'll talk about that, I guess, but that was something else. And so, and our government finds out about this, and then let's say our government says, cool, let's tell everybody, you guys, there are aliens, there's this, there's that, we're one of billions of different races. There are a lot of the world's religions that would be obliterated that day, because a lot of religions believe that they are the center of the universe. They believe, that there are no aliens because it's all, religious whatevers. And so what you would have is a shock to the system. You would have chaos. Some would turn on each other. Others would riot against the government and say it's not true, that it's a conspiracy, they're lying. Then, there are other people saying there's other conspiracies, that the government's withholding more information. I mean, it would turn this world into utter chaos. And that's the argument for saying, well, if something did happen, let's not tell people. And that's why there are a lot of people in this world that think that we've been visited by aliens several times before. Why aren't the government telling us? I don't know. Are you ready for it? Our society's like a freaking toddler. We are not ready to know about the birds and the bees yet. We're not ready. We can't handle this kind of stuff. As a whole, some of us are like, feed me more information. I want it. But yeah, I mean, it would destroy
some of us, that's why I said there's a group that would, and there's a group that wouldn't. And that's what the Star Trek idealism is about making first contact. It's about assessing that, taking the assessment of whether what that impact would be, by studying the culture, by listening, by studying the culture, seeing what they create, what kind of arts and crafts they create, whether they are able to have warp capability, which is also like a standard, I believe, for this first contact, right? Warp capability.
Exactly that, yes.
So in this case, we see that just having warp capability is not enough for this particular planet or this society or this alien race of people, right? The
Malcorians.
Malcorians, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, we can see that they're not advanced socially enough. And I think that was one of the big arguments made by the chancellor, saying instead of me investing in the warp program, I'm going to invest in education and social programs,
Yep.
which would eventually educate our people and let them get away from this idea of being the center of the universe, but coping with the idea that there could be other intelligent life, and and how coexisting with that life would look like. That was essentially the moral, the end game of the story. But I loved how they got to that point using this particular Riker undercover story.
Yeah.
It started out with the mystery of, like, at first you think, you're like, what what's going on here, and as you start to figure out, oh, um, I love the moment when, for example, the head doctor at the hospital says,
I think BB
he had.
Newirth was the head doctor. Okay, never mind. Let's go on. Let's move. Let's move. I'll cut that right out of the
No,
end.
yeah, we'll cut that out. No, no. When that doctor came out and he was like, don't let this get out, because this is, let's study this first. I don't want this
Mm-hmm.
to start to raise panic and suspicion. So let's try to keep this knowledge under wraps. And I loved also Riker waking up in the hospital bed trying to hold his cover, right? Because they know his cover is blown, but he's got the quick excuses for everything, right? So he's still holding his cover. He talks about, no, what are you talking about? It's a birth defect, genetic. I had my features enhanced because of this, that, and the third, and because of some kind of genetic irregularities, and he kept
Yeah.
he he
Good
kept
liar.
reaching.
Good liar. And then
Yes,
he's like, it's for a neighbor's son, of course. Any other
of
questions,
course.
bro? I've got these ready. I got a million of them.
Yes, exactly. And totally, somebody else would be like, oh shit, my cover's blown. Let me come clean with it, or you would see a little bit of panic kind of set in on them. But Riker, without even missing a step, had every excuse in the book lined up. He's like, yeah, seriously, I'm busy. All right, I'm sick. Here, I'm on a hospital bed. I need some time to rest right now. You guys are,
Crusher's on a sabbatical. That's all
yeah.
it is.
Forgot Crusher. Crusher, right? Never mind. Let me change the subject again.
Yeah. And by the way, there was an action figure made of Riker as a Malcorian, and I'm sure I've got it somewhere. It's interesting when they have like an action figure, a toy made of one episode. There was nobody else from this episode, but Riker as a Malcorian was one that was made. So that's pretty fun and interesting. So
Malcorian Riker.
yeah. So another thing that was interesting about this episode was that it was almost predominantly new characters and one-off characters. Usually you usually get two characters. There's the protagonist and antagonist in everything. Whether it's the leader of this faction and the leader of this faction, or whether it's the leader and the vice president of this thing, and one of them is the skeptic. Whether it's the president's the skeptic and the vice president is on our side, or the president is nice and the vice president's trying to get to him. Or there's usually that kind of dynamic. Sometimes there's a third and a fourth, kind of tertiary characters. But this one had 6. It was almost, but I think for the most part, we were able to keep track of them. They put glasses on them to show them apart, but 6 characters. Worf had one line. Geordi, I don't think, was even in this. Data had 1 or 2 lines. Troy had 1 or 2 lines. Crusher had a couple lines. It was basically Picard, Riker, and 6 newbies. It's pretty interesting, though. It worked.
It did work. I mean, it worked, and little things just make it really great because, for example, the hospital bed that Riker was laying on, it had these little gadgets and beep up machine, light up little panels and stuff, and it looked just enough different where you're like, that's not Starfleet, right?
Yeah.
Right. You look at it, you're like, Starfleet makes it a lot cleaner. Like that, it's like you look at an iPhone, you know how clean the lines are and everything. There's a certain level of quality that Apple does when they make a product, right? And you can see if it looks all junky and put together, you're like, that's not Apple. There's no way.
That's an
So
Android.
right, whatever. You're like, that's not that kind of a product. And that's how I felt watching that hospital. But I'm like, that's not Starfleet. Like, where are we? And then you get the language also to complement that as well. You get the whole, I want to make sure there's a guard at the door 29 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, you love just little things like that for me really help paint the picture of what they're trying to tell, which is Riker got in some kind of caught up in a riot or some sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
He ended up losing consciousness, rushed to the hospital, and then his cover is blown, and he's discovered to be, not one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Totally great episode. Also, right away, I got Twilight Zone vibes.
I knew it, yeah, because it could 100% be a Twilight Zone episode.
100% got Twilight Zone vibes. As soon as, because Twilight Zone actually has an episode that mirrors this in some type of way, and that is those a hospital. It's a hospital scene as well, and the doctors that are working on this woman are all kind of have this weird deformed looking face.
Yeah, I remember that. That's one of the most famous episodes ever. Yeah,
one of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes, and she's of course this traditionally beautiful, I think blonde or something to that effect woman, and she's they think she's the ugly one, right? They want to transform her into how they look, and the episode kind of has this level of horror to it.
Mm-hmm.
And this episode kind of started off in, it kind of takes that idea and makes a whole nother idea out of it, right? It takes it and spins off this first contact idea, which is wonderful. And I thought, well done. Mark Zicree, also credit to him as well for, coming up with stories that are really have good meat on them. However, they're extracted and extrapolated, and whoever does the language of the words or whatnot. But the baseline of the story, we know that Mark Zicree is credited for this story, and he deserves credit for taking something, making it original, and coming up with something that is very fascinating, almost riveting to me.
Yeah, at the very least, Mark Zicree pitched an idea that was the meat and bones of this story, and then 5 people wrote it into a script. I would love to hear the story behind this, whether it was like 2 people took a crack at it and then another person kind of rewrote it, and or if it was just like 5 people sitting in a room saying, we got a deadline, this is a good idea, let's knock it out together, it's Friday Day or whatever, it's like they gotta just get it done. But anyway, more about First Contact and what a great concept that is. And you touched on it earlier. Yeah, warp drive is the driving force of that, because the way they look at it, once you have warp drive, you're going to run into people anyway. That's it. The cat's out of the bag. The toothpaste is out of the tube. It's going to happen. So you might as well try to make it as good as possible. You might as well learn about these people and try to have a good welcoming committee and custom make that first contact to the race. Are they a race that needs to be respected above everything else? Are they a race that wants to be spoken to with just science and fact? Or how do you talk to these people? How do you address them? And this is how they were studying it, because they were preparing for First Contact. And then they also were saying how there's the stories of like people seeing, ever since they started doing warp drive, there's little ships in the sky and little lights floating around, and people, there's all the stories. And of course that's always a wink and a nod to us, like where we're like, see, that's what my cousin Jimmy out in Arkansas said he saw some lights and he was abducted by some squid people, or whatever it is. So that's what makes this episode so cool, is that it really digs deep into a concept, first contact, that we've heard about. And it gives us a demonstration of it, in the works, so that we can understand the good and the bad and why they do it and the pitfalls of it. And at the end, it isn't a happy ending. It's not horrible, but like, we did learn something. We're like, wow, it doesn't always work. There's an understanding. There is now a goal to strive for, but it's not going to work right now. And I think that was a really brave and good way to take this, because it's all too easy to be like, all right, we figured it out, we worked it out, and now the people will all celebrate together and they'll, get everything right. But life isn't like that always.
Yeah, that's another thing that makes the episode so great, is that it mirrors essentially our own government stance on what the policy is, right? Like, we're not disclosing this, as if that conversation that happens between the Chancellor and Picard has happened with a president at some point and a captain of some other vessel at some point, right? It almost feels like this conversation is classified and has already happened somewhere at some point with some world leaders, right? So that's the beauty of watching this episode. You're watching it thinking as if it's already been applied, in our own life. And the reactions are very natural. The language is even natural for me. Very few parts where I was able to see a twist. I can tell you that I was in the dark really about. It was more like, this is what first contacts are like, and let's convince these people.
Yeah.
But the twist that I did find that I did enjoy was the whole Krola character trying to become a martyr. I couldn't see that.
That was the biggest surprise. I remember this episode, and even I didn't remember that. I was like, oh, wow, dark. This guy's legit. Like, he's like, I do not want these people on my lawn, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get these damn kids off my lawn. But we do have to jump to our break real quick. We'll talk more about him in a moment, but also not just BB Newirth of Frasier and Cheers fame and Broadway, but there was another actor in this episode that I recognized, and I recognized this actor from, in my opinion, the most quotable movie ever. There's a movie that I think is the most quotable. That's just got the most best quotes. And this actor was in it. Right. We'll get on that in just a moment. We'll be right back on the Seventh Rule. Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Seventh Rule with Sirach, the game changer Lofton.
Game changing.
What's the game? Everybody knows it's cricket, which is the second most popular sport in the world as far as number of fans.
Says no one.
No, Sirach's looking at me like I just gave him indigestion with that, but it's true, because it's not popular in most of the world, but it's very popular in, say, like India and Pakistan. And those two countries combined is like 2 billion people. So even just those two alone, plus, England, plus Australia, New Zealand, things like that, it's like theoretically has the second most fans in the world. And I'm like, that's weak. You guys got to learn a little bit more. Cricket.
Well,
or maybe we're wrong.
BB Newirth wanted to play cricket with Riker.
She wanted to play something. Well, she did, it seems like. Well, let's talk about the trivioids real quick and then get back into this. Commander Riker is missing 3 costal struts on one side and 4 on the other. Riker got caught in some riots. Rivas Jakara lives in the Marta community on the southern continent. The Malcorians have been doing space flights. The Malcorian day is 29 hours. The Malcorians accepted the Chancellor's social reforms because they believed in him. Scientists generally accept the arrival of Federation representatives more easily than others. Marasta Yale's parents took her to the planetarium when she was a child. Krolla has his own political agenda. Data prefers artificial life form to machine. Picard shares wine and toast with Chancellor Avel Durkin. Riker will call Linnell the next time he's in her star system. There's no starship mission more dangerous than First Contact, and disastrous First Contact with the Klingon Empire led to decades of war. Those of you that have seen Broken Bow, the first episode of Enterprise, remember that. The Klingon was played by actor Tiny Lister. If Sirach, you remember him, Debo from Friday.
Yeah, Debo. Yeah.
That's my bike, punk. Anyway.
Hide your chain. Hide your necklace.
Yeah. Oh, shit. Here comes Debo. Okay, so there's really a lot in this episode, even though there was no B plot. But, so the answer is the guy that plays Krolla, the security minister guy that wants to be a martyr, recognized him right away. He was in the movie 1984 Ghostbusters. Ghostbusters, which I believe is the most quotable movie ever with Dan Aykroyd and
you did say
Bill
that.
Murray.
Yeah.
He was the guy when they're first going to the building to find Slimer, and he's like the maitre d', and he's like, it's in there. It's in there. Please keep it down. He's like that guy. And then when they come out, he's like, did you see it? Did you see it? And they're like, we got it right here. And then they're like, that's $5,000. He's like, absolutely not. I never expected it would be that much. And they say, well, put it back. He's like, okay, go ahead. Anyway, that guy, really cool hotel concierge or whatever those things are. Funny fellow.
That's the guy who played Krolla.
Yep. The martyr.
Yeah.
So another thing that I thought was really smart with the writing was, to your point when you were saying they kind of changed up the language, right? They didn't say ribs. They said costal struts, right? Costal we know is ribs. Apparently they have Latin origin too. And rather than kidney, they said renal organ, right? So we understand that to be a kidney because we know renal is kidney, things like that. So what I thought
I thought they were referring to his penal organ.
Hey, only one did. And the reason I thought that was smart was because they're introducing 6 characters with 6 names. And the Malcorians, if they actually start giving the rib a different name, like if they called it a Struth or whatever, we'd be like, okay, Struth. And then there's a Valis, whatever, we remember. So it's like they're changing up the language, but still using terms we could understand, so we don't have to wrap our minds around like 15 new terms. So I thought it was a good balance of introducing something new and different without making our brains have to work too hard for it, because we're already trying to memorize 6 new characters, So I thought that was really good.
Yeah, not easy to have 6 new characters with 6 distinct different personalities as well, like that are kind of fleshed out in that way so that they all have something that you can say, okay, he's the guy that's about justice and righteousness. This other guy is the skeptic, right? He's the skeptic guy. The other guy who was about justice was about the hotel, the head of, not the hotel, the hospital, the head of the hospital. He was a kind of a righteous character who was split on principle. Remember at the end, towards the end there, he said, I will not revive Riker because you want him revived. And then the other guy said, oh, well, then we'll have you replaced by somebody else.
Right.
So he stood on the kind of this principled character. Yeah, why are you reminding us?
Did somebody say justice? I could have sworn you said justice.
Okay. No, not the episode. Jeez. No. That's called the count. That's a different episode.
Yeah. I know where you're going with that one.
But can I ask you a question? Because I wanted to know, when Dr. Crusher appears in the hospital room with Riker, and she's with Worf and another male kind of assistant nurse character. I couldn't figure out how she knows to be there. That part must have
be monitoring. They're monitoring their every move, but they're just not saving Riker because they're not trying to ruin First Contact. But then once Riker is at the point where he's about to die, they're like, okay, we have no choice. We have to intervene. Now, how they can pay attention to every single move, that's when it gets a little weird. Like how do they know all this stuff? But, theoretically, the reason they weren't there and then they appeared then was because they're trying not to ruin first contact, but now they have to because Riker's about to die from these dorks.
Yeah, I would have liked a little bit more of an exposure, like written wise. For example, if somebody had found that little jewel pendant, the communicator, and handed it to him and said, "We found this. Does this belong to you?" And just before the whole martyr scene, we see Riker, hit the communicator so they can hear what's happening there in the struggle. That would have been a moment.
I wonder if maybe that was something in one of the drafts or something like that, because it does feel like they set up that when he says, "Hey, I got a piece of jewelry," and we all know what he's talking about, but then it didn't go anywhere really. They could explain it away of like, hey, that's just what he was looking for because he's trying to get out of there. But yeah, it would have been nice if there was like a little tie-in there. The other thing I can think of was when the lady went up to the ship, I think she told Picard where Riker is. She's like, oh yeah, the alien guy is being held at the hospital and blah, 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 that kind of thing. So there's it's close. It doesn't give us the exact connection that would have really kind of satisfied, I think.
Yeah, because it's a very specific location for Crusher, Worf, and the other guy to beam into at that exact moment when it was needed the most. So it was a little bit too fortuitous for me. It was like, wow, what great timing that exactly when Riker's going to die, here comes the beam in. Like, where was this for the rescue operation or some other moment in time? For example, when he was trying to break out of that hospital, like where were they then? So I don't know, just like a moment where they hand him back, say, "We found this, and does it belong to you?" He clicks on it. The other guy walks in, distracts him, and he kind of hides it because he doesn't want to see it. But the communication line is still open, so Crusher and them can still hear. And then they know by the location of the comm badge where to beam into. But that's a little nerd kind of detail that we all get into at some
big
point.
Nerd. There was something where I thought of you, by the way, speaking of nerd, which was when the guy was kind of, I think it was like the main doctor originally, he was kind of asking Riker questions. And he's like, "Hey, what's these irregularities? And what's this? And, your doctor's name is Crusher." And it wasn't quite sitting with him. It's like, "Oh, yeah, we'll be back." And he walks away and then he comes back and goes, "Oh, and just one more thing." He did that and he says, and I don't remember what his question was, but he said something like, where you're from or what's the phaser? I think he had the phaser. "Just one more thing. What's this thing?" And anyway, that was just funny. I thought of you because I know that's a Columbo move.
That's a big Columbo moment right there. I love it. Yeah, it was a nice Columbo moment. I also love the actor who played this Marista. It was Marasta.
Yeah.
Marasta, right?
Marasta, yeah.
Marasta.
Her last name was Farian, I think.
Yeah, it's Marastafarian or
yeah.
I thought that was a good character. I enjoyed the scene, for example, when they first take her on board the ship and say, "Hey, let's show you what's really going on." She played that moment really well, as far as like being actually in general. When she first gets approached by Picard, I felt like she was just a little bit suspicious, but also still curious. She played it very well as far as that whole role of Marasta.
Yeah, I was actually happy with the acting all around. Like, I thought everybody did well. It's not easy to do that well with one line or 6 lines or whatever they all got. But they all kind of stood out. They played it well. There was one I would have liked to see a little bit more, and I'm being such a nitpick when I'm saying this. It was the president, or whatever he was, prime minister, when he came onto the ship. I thought that he didn't quite look trepidatious enough. It was almost, and again, this is just a huge nitpick, but when like Picard is, walking them through the bridge, and the lady's already been there. So if Picard is showing them something, she's going to walk like, oh yeah, let's check this out. But the president's going to be a lot more like, kind of what's going on, and then slowly following him along. And that to me is just a symptom of take 13. You know what I mean? So like his movements looked more rehearsed than natural. And again, huge, just totally terribly nerdy nitpick, but I felt like there could have been a little bit more of a pause of kind of like soaking it in and kind of almost grudgingly or trepidatiously following Picard over, like, okay, this is weird, just very minor, but that just felt like it was, you do 15 takes, they're not all going to be perfectly natural movements.
Yeah, that could also be in the writing. I felt like that same kind of trepidation could have been added in the toast. I thought it was a
Yeah.
little bit too. It was a little bit too compliant for the chancellor to say, "Oh, sure, I'll drink whatever you hand me," and
And
it's
who
like,
knows if it's poisonous? I was like, Picard,
uh,
you are so irresponsible. How do you know that grapes don't kill them?
yeah,
What are you
exactly.
doing?
How do you know how alcohol even responds in their system?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I just think in general that was not the best way to, you know, I think it would have been more impressive for Picard to say to that Chancellor character, "Hey, what would you like to drink?" And that person say whatever it is that he likes to drink. Well, I would like a Tarkalian da da da
Yeah.
da, but you don't have it. And then Picard walk up to the Replomat and say, actually, we do have it. Make him a Tarkalian or whatever the hell that is, right? That would have been impressive to the guy to say, hey, look, we can not only I will make whatever you desire, as opposed to hand you some, hey, would you like a shot at tequila? Uh, it's what you desire, what you ask for, and we're also showcasing our technology. Look, this Replomat machine can actually create something out of thin air, which I'm sure you guys don't have yet. So, all of these kinds of things, I think, subtle changes. But what him taking the toast and saying to health, I'm like, okay, what is that, a tradition for you guys to do toast to on your planet? It was a little too compliant. I think he should have
Yeah.
been looking at it like, no, thanks, I'm all
And
right.
snorting it up his nose and whatever they do. They're like,
Yes,
oh, you don't do it
yes,
like this? That's weird.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
But what it was it just, it created some cute moments for me. Like, especially like at the very end, which I thought was really cute, which was when he says, with luck, we will both be around to renew our friendship, Captain. I was like, I thought it was cute how they became friends and they respected each other. And even though
Yeah,
they know they're probably never going to see each other again, like, because they told Marasta, you're never coming back here. We are leaving this planet behind. These guys are ass backwards and they need more time. You're never seeing this again. And she's like, great. I've always wanted to have sex with an alien, just like that other girl.
yeah, that was another thing that was like, oh god, we had to throw that in for old time's sake.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
know what's weird about that to me? I mean, first of all, looking at it through the lens of 2024 is a little problematic because you're like, that's called rape, dude. If he's like trying to escape with his life and you're like, I
yeah,
will save your life if you have sex with me because I
yeah,
have a kink. I have a fetish about aliens and you're a
yeah,
freak show and I want to have
yeah,
sex with you and then I'll save your life. So that's obviously that, putting that aside, I thought that that was put in for humor, obviously, especially based on the musical score that was there. It's like, it's like giggle giggle kind of music. Which fine, we like humor in Star Trek and Next Generation, they do it well, but there was pretty much zero humor throughout the rest of the episode. So that's why it didn't really seem to fit. It almost seemed like that was a relic of, a previous iteration of the script, of like it passed through so many hands and that scene just kind of stayed there. Whereas if it went through one more pass, they would have been like, wait, does he really have to hump her, or can we just save it because she likes aliens? Or, I mean, you know what I mean? So I feel like that was a casualty of a lot of versions of the scripts, I would think, because it didn't fit. There was no other humor. There was no comedy. There was no setup to this. It was just a lady shows up, wants to hump him. He pops out. He's like, okay. They're like fixing themselves. She's wiping her mouth, and they just, just go about their merry way. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, it actually was a little bit delightful to watch. I know that it is dated, but her performance as written is well done.
She's a great actor.
She's just a great actor, and it made me realize why I loved her so much on Cheers and Frasier, because she has this way of being flirtatious and playful, and the way she delivers lines, it's just unusual and unique, only to her. Nobody else really does it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And that was brought back into light when I saw her kind of say, I can't wait to learn, when she says that to him, and he's like, our anatomy's different and this and that. And he's like, yeah, I can't wait to learn, like whatever you want to do.
Yeah. And also, just to add to that point, your point, the first one is that the second she walks into that room and says her first line, you recognize her immediately because of the way, not just her voice and her way of speaking, but the way she stood, kind of like she had a weird way of standing, and you're immediately like, whoa, it's Lilith,
Yes. Kind of funny. Yes. Yeah. And I thought she also delivered really one great line where he says to her, he says, because I'm an alien, he says, because I don't belong here and I need to get back on my ship. She says, I believe you. The way she says that was very believable. Like, she's like, oh, you're not lying to me now. You're telling me the truth. You do have a ship out there that you're going to get back to. Of course, I thought his Riker's stunt double was just miraculous. I couldn't tell which was Riker or his stunt double. That's how great it is. Yeah.
See, I didn't even notice it, but I know that a lot of times I did think at that point, like, wow, they went so fast to grab a stick and bash him with it. I was like, whoa, relax. But I'm assuming that's the scene you're talking about.
Yes, that's the scene. His stunt double was hilarious. Another corny line was, to me, like, this is where they could have done without the corniness. I don't know. It's still on the tail end of the corny, era of television a little bit. But when he says, I'll call you next time I pass through your star system, like, it was just a little bit too, I would have liked it to have been handled more like Riker. And it felt like it wasn't like Riker. I felt like Riker would have said or done different things,
Oh, yeah. So we only got a few minutes left. Let's get into the home run of the episode. What do you say? This is the 7th rule home run of the episode. Shout out to Carrie Schwent for making that cool baseball.
Yeah, Carrie. Yeah. I'm going to go with giving the home run to Mark Zicree.
Nice.
For coming up with this story. I think it's a clever story. I think it's a well executed storyline. Not easy to have this many guest stars in, and very few of your main cast, and still keep the attention of the audience. But I felt like they had just enough of the regular cast, and they had just enough storyline to keep me intrigued. It was compelling. It gave me first contact origin stories. It was just well played. There were moments here and there that I could have done better with, but even to learn about how the Klingons and their first contact situation didn't go well, and how that kind of informed the Federation on how they would proceed going forward. That's the backstory on the Federation itself. I enjoy those kinds of moments. And let me also say that I would have liked this episode to come earlier in the show, actually, so much so as the first season. And I think that this episode would have been a great introduction to one of the regular cast members. This would have been a perfect way to introduce a character like a Deanna Troy, for example. Deanna Troy coming from this planet, and she could have been the character at the end who says, I want to stay behind. And then watching that character's journey as they are on a starship counseling the captain would have been more interesting with this level of a backstory attached to it. Troy would have actually made more sense. It would have been, she would have had kind of like the data, let's watch things unfold through her eyes, because she hasn't seen a lot of this stuff before. This is her first journey into the stars. And I think that whether it was Troy or another regular season, regular series cast member, this would have been a perfect introduction for that character. When that woman at the end says, I'd like to stay behind,
yeah,
and makes that decision, that would have been the beginning, a great pilot episode for me to watch the next generation with this new character going on the journey, for the first time.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you know what series does do that well is Star Trek Voyager. First episode, Neelix and Kes, Neelix, Ethan Phillips. They were introduced in that first episode. They were aliens, and they basically said, we want to come with you. And then later on, there was also like they saved a bunch of Borg babies or Borg children, and then they included them into their roster or their crew. So that does happen sometimes. But yeah, that was Voyager. They never did anything like that in Next Generation. It would have been great, because that is always a great first episode. It's a great beginning to start that off.
Yeah.
So my home run of the episode actually surprisingly goes to Captain Picard, because of the acting that Patrick Stewart did when he was talking with the president of the other planet. Like, he had concern, but he had a mission, and he was sure in what he was doing, but unsure in how it would pan out. And then he was very humble, saying, this is what we did. This is why we did it. This is what we do. And it was a mistake. And the guy said, it's nice to hear that you make mistakes. And then Patrick Stewart did a great job of saying, oh, this is my opening to become friends. He says, oh, I have definitely, I don't remember what the line was, but he's like, I have made some huge mistakes in my time. I want to know the exact, he said, Chancellor, I've made some fine ones in my time. And I was like, that, and he delivered it so well, and it was good, really just a good moment. So I thought the best act and the best moments were Picard's, surprisingly. Yeah. But that's it for me on that one. We do want to give a special thanks to people who hit the home run every day. And their names are as follows: Homer Frizzell, Dr. Anne-Marie Siegel, Eve England out in Wales, Yvette Blackman, Tom T.J. Jackson Bay out in Missouri, Titus Muller, Dr. Mohammed Noor, Tierney C. Diekman, Anil O. Palat, Joe Balsarati, Mike Gu, and Dr. Stephanie Baker, Carrie Schwent, Faith Howell, Edward Foltz, My Live from Tokyo, the Matt Boardman, Chris McGee, Justin Weir, Jake Barrett, Henry Unger, Allison Leach Hyde, Julie Manosfi, Jed Thompson, Dr. Susan V. Gruner, Glenn Iverson, Dave Gregory, Tim Baum, Chris Sternett, Dylan Powell, Peter Draymore, Chris Garris, and of course, Jason Oken and Greg K. Wickstrom. All right, everybody, stick around. We've got the free-for-all up next. What did the people think of this episode? You know what Srock and I thought. But what does everybody else think? We'll be right back on The Seventh Rule. Hey, everybody, welcome back to The Seventh Rule with Srock Lofton.
Hello. Hello.
This is the free-for-all with Melissa Longo. Jason M. Oken, of course, England is out in Wales, judging us. Faith Howell is here on the bridge of the Enterprise D. Carrie Schwent, #1 Cubs fan, is also here. She's got some cool stuff behind her. Chris Garris has some action shots of some ships. Chris McGee is here. Oh, he's matching Melissa Longo with his Stembolt and Chill shirt. Gregory Kenzo's out in Hawaii as per usual. Allison Leach Hyde's wearing a shirt that I don't understand what the heck's going on. And of course, what is it?
LLAP.
Oh, cool. Whoa, that is cool. And the Matt Boardman is here, of course, our favorite homie. Jake Sisko guesses the IMDb score.
Well, I'm going to say that this episode was really entertaining. Liked it a lot. And I don't know, it just felt really good. It felt like one of those old school sci-fi episodes. So I'm going to say that the IMDb score was like an 8.5.
I had a feeling you'd say that. Does anybody else have any guesses that doesn't already know?
I'd go a little lower, 8.2.
What did you say, Eve?
8.4.
Anybody else have any guesses?
Yeah, I was going to say 8.1, so close to Jason's guess.
8? Yeah.
I believe somebody has hit the nail on the head, proverbially, of course. It is, in fact, let me make sure I don't get this wrong, an 8.1. Very good, Chris McGee. There he is.
Nice.
Excellent work. Everybody was close, though. 8.1 to 8.5. Very good. And non-appearance mentions, I got one. Robert Picard, right?
Correct.
There are others?
I had one more.
Yeah.
The Klingons were mentioned, actually.
From Broken Bow, kind of, huh?
Yep.
Oh.
When he was talking about that's how come we started a war with the Klingons.
Yeah, Melissa's got something to say about this one.
Yeah, it doesn't count as a NAM.
But it's a very strong reference, and Srock and I actually talked about it because Debo plays that Klingon, which is pretty awesome. And some kinds of...
Have we seen Robert before? His brother?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in Family, the episode... Remember they're doing the mud fight, Srock?
Yeah, they were.
Oh, yeah.
Some mud wrestling.
Yeah.
I erased that out of my memory, so thanks for bringing that up.
Mr. McGee, did we have any some kinds of or some sorts of?
Not this time that I could tell.
Blast. All right. Melissa Longo, will you please get us started off on the right track by telling us what you thought of this particular episode, which is the final episode of the first half of the series.
No, crazy. I enjoyed this episode very much. I always enjoy episodes that provoke questions. And I have a question for the live chat and for things left unsaid. So if you're not a patron already, subscribe, become a patron, and then you can watch things left unsaid and answer this question or hear the answer to this question. And my question is it's kind of a two-part question. How do you think you would react to encountering an alien species by surprise? And how would you like to react? So realistically, how do you think you would react to meeting an alien? And does that match or differ from how you would like to think you would like to approach an alien species?
And would you hump it? You're like, oh.
And would you hump it? I mean, is this part of your fantasy too? Answer that in the live chat. But I will leave it short as this. I got some TOS vibes from this episode too. It felt kind of old school in a very positive way. But I enjoyed this episode overall.
Thanks very much, Melissa P. Longo. All right, Jason M. Oken, did you also enjoy this episode, or did it make you upset?
Well, I've always found it enjoyable. And Melissa, to your point, I think it's the first time we see sort of an episode open from somebody else's point of view since probably Tomorrow's Yesterday in the first season of the original series. It has sort of that kind of vibe to it for sure. It certainly starts swiftly. It's entertaining. It does show in a way what would happen if sort of the aliens landed in America, maybe not necessarily on Earth, because it really shows that kind of society. There's a lot more to it, and I think my views on it changed a little over time, and I'll talk about that in Things Left Unsaid. But again, it's an enjoyable episode. Still is absolutely worth watching.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Jason M. Oken. All right, Eve England out in Wales, the skeptic among us. What do you think of this one? This is your first time ever seeing this series in this episode, right?
Yeah, and I was just watching this thinking, this is just so different to everything we've just seen, and I thought it was just such a clever way of having it from the aliens' perspective, because it just gives you that sort of sense. You really get that sense of paranoia, and you get the sense of what it really was probably like for them to do first contact and to see it from that perspective. And again, it's totally what you just said in terms of it definitely reminded me of a sort of old school sci-fi sort of a Roswell kind of story, and how you had all of those archetypal characters in there who were the skeptic, the scientist, the sort of mediator, and which is I guess it can be seen as a little bit tropey, but I think it worked really well in how they brought it all together, and it just looked amazing. I just loved how dark and sort of it had lots of pinks and lots of blues in it, and the music really sort of permeated through that sort of have that intensity throughout. I mean, that lady, that sort of horny nurse's glasses were just amazing. I definitely wanted those glasses. But I think that was the only thing that kind of I didn't like about the episode, was that that scene. Although I guess somewhere else might have been kind of funny, I think looking at it from this perspective in 2024, it was just a little bit creepy. And if it had been the other way around, I think would have been quite problematic. But apart from that, to take that out, I thought it was really fantastic, and I think it should have scored higher actually.
Great stuff. That's true. A little gender reversal there, and we would be like, right. What the is this episode?
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. Thank you very much, Eve England out in Wales. Faith Howell is here. Thank goodness she is finally back. What did you think of this episode on your 30th viewing of it?
Yeah, 60th maybe. I don't know. Yeah, I think I confused this episode with what was that other episode that we thought was going to be trash and wasn't really that bad? Where Riker's also like in a hospital. So I think I've merged those two in my head, and so I really like it, but I always go, oh yeah, this is its own thing. Yeah, I definitely watching it this time picked up on a few subtle innuendos, shall we say, and I will point to several of your backgrounds as to which one I'm referring to, that totally went over my head as a child, and thankfully they cut that so well that it was like there but not there. I love it. I like that I can watch Trek with my children in the room. What else to say? It was just generally enjoyable. I always love when they sort of flip the script on things like this, and so we get to see a classic trope but from a new angle. I just really appreciate that kind of thing. And like they hit all the stereotypes, right? What would you do with an alien? All the things.
All of the things.
So we'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Faith Howell, for keeping it classy, kind of. Carrie Schwent is here. What's up, Carrie Schwent? What do you think of this episode?
I enjoy this episode. It's great. You get to see what could happen from their point of view, and aside from Distant Origin and Voyager, it's the only Star Trek episode that shows the others' point of view, aside from our main crew. That one is also quite excellent. I will briefly gush over the guest stars, as I want to do, because I watch so many things and I love seeing people I recognize. The first one being Corolla, the guy who tries to kill himself with a phaser. I know him from two things are my favorite things. Ghostbusters.
Yep.
He is the hotel manager where they meet Slimer for the first time. And he plays Benjamin Guggenheim in Titanic, who has probably one of the best lines in that movie later on. One of the porters is trying to give him a life vest. And he says, no, thank you. We are dressed in our best and prepared to go down as gentlemen. Just because that line is so great. He's resigned to it. He's dressed good. He's ready. And the Chancellor Durkin, I know him best as the patriarch of the Huntsberger clan from Gilmore Girls, the grandfather of one of Rory's boyfriends later on in the series. He just mostly sits there with a glass and just sort of clinks the ice in the glass. Fantastic guy. And he also, I found out, does the voice of Bud Selig in an episode of Celebrity Deathmatch that features Bud Selig versus Barry Bonds. Watched that earlier. Absolutely hysterical. Now, Marasta, we've seen her once before in I wrote it down which episode. Season 2 episode Contagion. She was the Romulan commander in that episode. So I gushed on her before because I think she's awesome and I love her voice. But my favorite cameo or guest star is, of course, BB No Earth. I grew up watching her pop up on Cheers as Lilith. Lilith was my favorite character, I think, of the guest stars that would pop up from time to time. And I found she did, between Cheers and Frasier, 92 episodes as that character. And I found out in my research, she was filming Cheers at the same time this episode was happening. And what they did was they put her makeup on. She would go across the lot, do rehearsals for Cheers in her alien makeup, finish the rehearsal, go back over to the Star Trek set and film her scenes. And apparently her Cheers cast members just absolutely loved it. They thought it was absolutely hysterical that she was there and in her makeup. As funny as the scene is, play for laughs, I could have probably done without it, because if you gender flip it, it's just super uncomfortable. But the way she pulls it off was fun. Jonathan Frakes apparently loved filming the scene with her, found her absolutely hysterical. I have some headcanon as to how their encounter played out that I'll save for things left unsaid, because I don't know, I personally think it's pretty funny. But Marasta absolutely did the right thing leaving with the Enterprise. She would have been absolutely miserable. She is definitely like me, and like the poster behind me. We are Mulder. We want to believe, and I found a Star Trek version of the X-Files poster. So I knew immediately I was going to try to find a version of that poster for the background. And so she inspired this episode's limerick, so I will end with that. This is hard, but it's the right thing to do. My people just aren't ready for this news. But I won't live in the past. I know too much to turn back. Perhaps one day the stars will be pursued. Thank you.
Excellent work. Thank you so much, Carrie Schwent, aka Crafty Bear. Ooh, Melissa's snapping. Chris Garris,
time.
what's up, Chris? What'd you think of this one?
Yay. I've always liked this episode. I just, it's got comedy in it, humor, obviously with the Riker. And I always have to call her Lilith because that's who she is, interaction. That was just, I don't know. I thought it was kind of funny. But then it was just, I really liked how, Picard and the Chancellor, the situation that they were in, they really made you think, because he wanted to progress, but he had to stop because, and I'll make some more stuff how I would feel later on, but he had to watch out for his society and be careful because he knew what would happen. He could see what would happen from the go. Just his security chief was already having issues with that. And so it was good. when Riker has tried to run away, she's like, they'll catch you, come in here, and all this other stuff. And it was, and then when they when they're first looking for all of his organs, and they're like, his heart's in his digestive tract.
Yeah.
So it was a good story. It does make you think about really how would we as a civilization handle first contact and not really seeing aliens. So I just don't know. But overall, it was a good episode for the season, and some interesting things I'll mention later that I looked up as well. So, but yeah, overall, I thought it was a good episode.
Nice. Stay tuned for that good stuff. Thank you very much, Chris Garris.
Nothing too crazy at all.
We'll see. Chris McGee is here. If we want something too crazy, here it comes. What do you got for us, Chris McGee?
Yes, indeed. First contact. And no, Ryan, it's not a euphemism Riker uses to describe his encounter with Linnell. Another great episode, and explores how Starfleet handles, or is supposed to handle, introducing themselves to a new species that is on the verge of interstellar travel. As was mentioned several times, this episode was, I think, intentionally written to explore how a similar scenario would play out here on Earth if we were approached by aliens in a formal first contact kind of scenario. I would bet that as much as people would have been divided on the issue, just like they are in the episode, when it aired 30 years ago, I'm certain the division would be even worse today, sadly. But I'm sure we'll all have more to discuss about that in Things Left Unsaid. So the guest stars, loved seeing Carolyn Seymour in this episode, a wonderful, talented actress. Although I think this is the only role I've seen her play that isn't a villain. Seeing her character's face light up with delight when Picard allows her to stay on board always makes me smile. And this is our first Frasier actor, of course, has been mentioned. That shows up on the show. Although it's a relatively small role, Bebe Neuwirth absolutely, in my opinion, steals this show. As was mentioned, it didn't age well, but nevertheless, her part does inject some much-needed comic relief in this otherwise very serious drama, and she just knocks it out of the park, I think. For the memorable quote, well, it's basically when Picard is referring to having made mistakes in his life. Chancellor, I have made some fine ones in my time.
Yeah. Excellent line. Yep, absolutely. Thank you very much, Chris McGee, a.k.a. the wearer of Stembolt and Chill, along with Melissa Longo. Greg Kenzo is out in Hawaii. He's got some macadamia nuts all over the place. What do you think of this one?
I thought this one was great. I particularly like these kinds of episodes. These, we get to go behind the scenes. Someone mentioned the ones in Voyager. I think there's one where Voyager's above a planet that ages rapidly, and we get to see the whole society come to fruition. This really reminded me of that episode. I know this was the original, but or I guess Who Watches the Watchers is kind of the original. This was very similar to that for me. But yeah, I really like this. I would say that, I think this is the inspiration for episode 1 of Strange New Worlds. Maybe if I'm remembering correctly, someone can correct me on that. Like everybody else, I love Frasier, so Bebe Neuwirth is welcome comic relief, but I do know that this would not fly. And it's really not cool. But it's the times, right? The philosophy that I took from this episode, I would say, I forget who the leader is, what his name is, but when Picard and him are talking, he says, "My world's history has recorded that conquerors often arrive with the words, 'We are your friends.'"
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was cool. It was like a game between them. I felt like the leader was testing Picard. He's like, if I ask you to leave, will you leave? And he's like, certainly, Anyway, yeah, it's great. Good to be back.
Great to have you back. And that was a good point that, like, when Picard and the president or whatever were talking, and he was kind of testing him out. What are my options here? Thanks very much, Greg Kenzo in Hawaii. Allison Leach Hyde, live long and prosper. What'd you think of this one?
I do like this one. This isn't one that was played a lot in syndication where I lived as a kid. So it's one I got to watch as an adult. So I do really like the whole idea of first contact kind of going wrong. And I also found out this time that I didn't notice before is that Mark Scott Zicree also wrote this episode and Far Beyond the Stars. So I thought that was pretty great. I didn't know that till today. I'm like, oh, that's why it's such a good story. He's very talented. Love it. So enjoyed finding that out. I really enjoyed the Chancellor this watch through because he put a lot of, the Chancellor's like, hey, I want this for me. And I know the scientists want this too, but we're not the only ones here. And I don't think my society is ready for this. And I thought that was really quite amazing for a man in a political position thinking about the whole over a small amount of people. And I'm like, that's great. Love to see that. And I also really enjoyed that Picard listened to his brother and shared the wine and didn't drink it by himself. And he chose the Chancellor. So that little tie back from earlier in the season was cute and enjoyed. BB is always fabulous to watch. Love that, Cheers is a holodeck program for all the Star Trek people and the other way around. They're all intermixing. So love seeing that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. It's a fun episode to watch. It's got great ideas in it. Sure, there's some plot holes, but every episode has them. So I enjoy it.
Ain't that the truth? Thanks very much, Allison Leach Hyde in New Mexico. All right. Matt Boardman, who says Old Mexico is even better. What'd you think of this one?
A fiesta. No, this is it's interesting because I think a lot of times in my rewatches of TNG, this is an episode that I skip, and I don't know why. And I was like, okay, why? What is it about this episode that makes me like it's a pass for me? And you know what it is? It's the frustration that I get when I watch it when it's like the conservative element of Krolla that Krolla represents hinders the progression that the people as a whole might have. Because, in answer to Melissa's question, I would totally be the one that's like, no, take me with you, because how cool, what an awesome opportunity. I mean, like, and so I get to that point where, and maybe I just get so invested in the story, I'm like, yes, and then it's like, no, we can't do it because we have an element of people who are not ready for that. And so I think that's why I skip, is because I hate that frustration that I feel with it. And it makes me think of a lot, we experience that same thing in the world today. We have certain elements of people who are comfortable with things being a certain way and maintaining that, and that hinders us. It makes me think of the space program where they stop pursuing nuclear means of propulsion as a way to travel through space because everybody freaked out about the dangers of it. And I look at how much that has hindered us, and why it's one of the reasons why I love For All Mankind, is because that wasn't a hindrance. And so, but it's a great episode in terms of, once again, we're having things that were established in Who Watches the Watchers, as far as the duck blinds and how the Federation approaches their introduction to another culture and observance and stuff like that. But I actually have to say that this time around I really did enjoy watching it, and I was like, okay, yeah, maybe I've grown up enough in my maturity of Star Trek watching that I can live with that discomfort a little bit.
The seventh rule, forcing people to watch episodes they don't want to see. Thanks very much, the Matt Boardman. It's good. It's all right, though. It's a good episode for sure. All right. Jake's final take. Cirroc Lofton, wherever you might be, Do you have any final thoughts on this episode?
Yeah, I got some final thoughts. Does Riker bring condoms with him for the away missions? Because I think Dr. Crusher needs to be testing for other kinds of diseases. He's going to be out here doing all kinds of things. But yeah, they need some Federation guys. Like, he's got to keep some respect on this. The other thing I noticed was in the hospital of that other planet, they use barn doors. And I thought, wow, barn doors is a universal thing. You know? Thank God for that. And then the last thing I was going to say was, I would have liked a little bit of a nod to the Men in Black type program that the government has to kind of cover up these kinds of incidences with first contact scenarios. And I would have liked the Chancellor at the end of that episode to kind of come to the realization that they perhaps will develop that kind of a program for his government and his society to cover up these kinds of, things that might happen. It would have been a nod to what we already kind of know to be true in our own reality. So it would have been a nice kind of play on that as well. So, yeah, those are my final takes. Really enjoyed the episode. I agree with everybody that the little part there with the sex, I'll let you free. It doesn't really age well. Doesn't work for me as well. It wasn't even necessary for the story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was really a great story without it. It might have been a 9 without that part. That actually took it down a notch. Even though I love seeing BB, and I think she's just a fantastic actor. I mean, she did play the hell out of that scene, and it was good the way she played it. However, for the writers, they want to make a science fiction show that encourages us to think and use the best of our, appeal to the best of humanity. They take those kinds of senseless kind of moments that are just, placating to the lower vibration we are. So I think that would have been better to have it without it. But overall, I think March the Cree comes with a great story to this first contact episode.
Yep. And that's Jake's final take, everybody, because Sirach Lofton said so. All right. That's it for us. Thank you to Faith, Matt, Allison, Greg, Chris McGee, Chris Garris, Carrie Schwent, who wants to believe, Eve England, and Jason M. Oken. From Melissa Longo, myself, Sirach Lofton, Aaron Eisenberg, thank you all very much for hanging out with us. If you see an alien, tell us. And until then, we'll see you next time. And what do we usually say? Always remember the 7th rule.